Now it's my pleasure to introduce your presenter today, Joanne Smith. Joanne Smith, President of Price to Profits Consulting and former DuPont Corporate Marketing and Pricing Director, assists B2B companies in transforming their pricing performance to enhance long-term profitability and growth. Her book, The Pricing and Profit Playbook, shows leaders how to transform their pricing one play at a time with proven solutions and simplified practical approaches. So with that, Joanne, welcome.
Thank you, Taylor. Well, let's jump right in on this. I want to tell you that today's talk is actually an excerpt from a full one-day course that I'm offering at the upcoming PPS conference, May 3rd. But let's jump right again into talking about your price increase. And I would ask you, how many of you know what your success rate is each time you go out with a price increase, whether it's your annual increase or mid-year increases? Actually, most companies have a very low success rate. Studies would show it's in the 30 to 50% range of success. My personal experience when I begin to work with companies is that it's 30% or less with many, many companies. So there is a huge opportunity to improve in this area. Now, typically what we have is sales will believe that they were trying their hardest, but could not get the price increase because of the competitive dynamics. There were just too many competitors going after the same volume, and they felt that they could not make the increase. Now, should you believe them? Clearly, they believe what they're saying, but should you believe them? Was the increase too high, or was it your execution? And I will tell you, my experience is, 98% of the time, it is the execution part that is the more weak part of our price increase. So in general, when we think about pricing and we think about how important is strategy or price setting versus execution for our success, in general, it's about 50% strategy, 50% execution in getting success. But if we narrow down to just the price increase process, execution far trumps strategy. It is the critical area to improve. And this is not only about the sales organization, although they are critically important, but there are other execution that happens with the pricing folks, the leadership, perhaps market communication folks that also need to be improved. So let me just say, if this woman here in this picture were your salesperson going into the buyer and coming in with that look on her face of terror or apologizing, in any way, when your sales folks go into the buyer and they do not exude 100% confidence and conviction that the price increase that they're about to put forward is fair, it's appropriate, and they're going to stick by it, boy, the buyer is going to pick up on those subtle signals immediately, and when they do, they're going to get more and more aggressive until they work that salesperson into giving them a discount. So the salespeople really have to believe in themselves and believe in the price increase they're putting forward. So how do we build this confidence and this conviction in our sales force that they just must have when they're in front of the buyer? I'm going to break it down and talk about this in three ways, and I think the three most important areas is the fact that we have a fair price and a fair price increase, that we have the skills to be able to execute, and that the leadership is not only just behind us in making sure we do this well, but actually in front of us, leading, incenting, motivating us to get this price increase. So let me talk about all three of these areas, starting with fair price. Now, many of us know when we look at our price and we compare it to the next best alternative, value quantification is one of the best tools we can do in order to really understand what our fair price is. And we certainly want to be doing that kind of activity. However, when we're doing price increase, we have to go beyond just the value pricing and begin to also think about strategic or industry level pricing and how we could favorably impact the market price. So not only do we want our fair share of our value, we want to actually shift the whole base up. So we're looking for those favorable market dynamics whenever we increase price, so we can use those to increase more often or higher levels. So what might some of those be? They are things like when you have high capacity utilization. And even if it's not high, if it's noticeably higher than it typically runs, good enough to make that a favorable pricing lever. If we have shared pain or rising costs, things like rising raw materials, or maybe you've got environmental regulations coming in that are affecting your cost base or your capital, or maybe there's shared pain, meaning your industry in general is barely profitable and is on the edge of being able to really remain in business over the long haul. Those are things you can use to raise prices. If a competitor increases, certainly you want to jump on that bandwagon and keep that forward momentum in your marketplace. Growing markets, favorable macroeconomics, all give us a more positive place to look for price increase. And certainly if there's high entry to barriers, or for a customer to switch to somebody else has high costs there, those things can be very favorable. So we're going to be looking at these, and particularly from the whole industry, not just ourselves, but which of these things are going on across the whole industry in such a way that perhaps our competitors are also saying, this may be a favorable time to increase price. And we're going to begin to use this in our rationale on why we might increase and hopes to be able to move the whole marketplace up. Now, for many commodity companies, they get pretty darn good at really doing the strategic level price. And whenever the dynamics are there and positive, they're pretty quick to move their price up. Unfortunately, I find that many companies that are more undifferentiated are afraid to make those same kind of bold moves. They tend to think about it from oh, we're special, we don't do price increases because our raws went up or our costs went up. But the fact is, if you think about your value and use and your quantification, it shouldn't be just about where you are opposite an in-kind competitor. You also want to think about it as your value add on top of what might be the nearest or closest undifferentiated or commodity price, right? Because we want to keep our value versus that lower level kinds of products that are in our similar industries. And as an example here, I worked with different specialty polymer companies, right? And they were afraid to move with raw material costs. They thought that would make them look like commodities, so they were special. And what happened in varying times were low-end polymers like polyethylene actually had higher prices than they did because they were afraid to move and keep their fair value relative to this low-end polyethylene. So we want to be able to move those, clearly if you're in a very differentiated product line specialty end, if you can combine your increase with value arguments as well as any kind of cost related, those are going to be a stronger way to do it. But we're definitely going to want to work with those. Now let me talk to why do customers push back on price. And this bottom one that I show, which is called fairness in price, this is when we actually set a price too high or an increase too high for the value that we have, or we just have buyers that do not need that value, will not pay for it. So this happens, but I would contend it happens far less so than people think. Maybe it's 20% or less of the time as a reason for why customers are pushing back. Because these top three in blue which are the main reasons that we see customers push back. So the first one is, again, around fairness, but it's around the rationale. So if your buyers don't understand the reason for your increase, you just throw out a number, hey, we're going up 5%. It creates a distrust in their mind. They want to feel fairly treated, and to feel fairly treated, they're going to want to know the reason on why this is happening. And whether that's cost, whether it's high demand and your title on your capacity, they're going to want to know those reasons so they feel fairly treated. The second area, once again, is coming back to fairness. But in this case, even if they understand your rationale and believe it, now they may well be worried about fairness versus other of their competitors. In other words, they're worried that maybe they're getting the price increase, but their competitors might not be getting the increase, might be better at pushing off and getting you to walk away from that increase. So they want to feel fair, that it's a fair increase, and that everybody is getting that increase. The third is always a tactic. Every buyer out there predominantly is going to try and test your conviction, shake your confidence. And it is just a tactic. They are going to try and convince you your price is too high. There's no way they will accept it. They will go elsewhere. But again, rarely do they do that. They are just looking to see whether you're going to hold firm. And the fact of the matter is, most salespeople fold here. But really, when they hold with conviction and confidence, they actually build trust with the buyer. The buyer actually feels more fairly treated. They realize that everybody is quite likely being treated the same way and that this is something that's fair. But once you start to give away and let them out of that increase, that buyer's thinking, if I had pushed harder, would I have gotten even a lower price? Are my competitors getting an even lower price because they know how to push harder? To actually create mistrust when you respond to that kind of a tactic. So that tactic area, that's around skill, and we're going to talk about skill. The other two are around how well you communicate your fair price in a way they feel fairly treated. And so if we talk about price communications for just a moment, we have communications that are around value quantification and where we can pictorially really show the value that we have relative to other choices for the customer. And clearly, Leverage Point does this in an exceptional way. Their tools help companies really bring out not just quantifying it, but how you communicate it to the customer. But when we're a price increase, not only do we like that, but we have to add to it the kinds of communication that will impact the full industry. So here's where we're going to get into things like customer letters, maybe third-party announcements, having it on your website, some transparent way that we can put out there so people know our rationale, know everybody's being hit, and in some way we hope will influence other parties in the marketplace. Now, our communications, whatever they may be, we're hoping for sure impact the customer. But our communications also have to impact our own sales force to really help them get more confidence and conviction. And certainly competitors that might be watching from afar and picking up bits and pieces, we hope that whatever they interpret we're doing, they're interpreting in such a way that they believe we are serious about our increase, that we're going to do what we say. We're not just putting it out there and then going for share, so that we can in some ways influence them to be more confident in moving forward with price. So let me move off of fair price and on to skill just a minute. In the area of skill, and I kind of pulled three kind of main pieces out. The first block that a salesperson now needs is when they're talking with a specific customer, they really need to know when they're getting pushback, should they hold with the highest price increase or give some away, how much of it away, or should they even walk away from this account? To have the skill to do that, they need to understand there are different buyer types out there and be able to figure out what kind of buyer type they're talking to. Those buyer types have different techniques to try and work the price pressure knob, and they need to have techniques to counter that kind of a buyer. They need to understand price volume trade-offs just in case they kind of give up some price to get more volume. And boy, this is an area where I see is so weak, and so many salespeople give up price for far too little volume. And clearly, if they have to give price, they need to know how to do it so they don't cause that customer to get more aggressive the next time, or competitors that may also be bidding on this same account to get more aggressive at other accounts. So skills there, and certainly that middle block of how do they influence the market, not just customer by customer, but how the totality of their moves actually cause a more aggressive customer base, a more aggressive competitive base, more aggressive internal sales force. They want to turn that all around so those three parties are more likely to be less aggressive and move price up. And for sure, you almost always have at least one competitor that gets very aggressive, might be looking for ways to build share at your expense during these times. And there are definite ways that you can try and counter that behavior. And hopefully, and most often, if it's done right, you can get that behavior to change. So once again, we're influencing the whole marketplace in an upward direction. Now this chart, I just love this study. This just hits home so closely for me. This was a number of customers that were asked, do you think you are more expensive than your competition? And look at this, 80% of the customers believe that they are slightly, if not significantly higher than their competition. That's impossible. That's impossible, right? At best, it's probably 50% higher. And if we really think about most industries, most competitors are really sitting about the same price, and it's a much smaller tail that is truly higher than the average. But our buyers convince all of us that we are the highest out there, that there are cheaper alternatives that are viable. So we continually feel we're higher when we're not. And when we have this misperception, we give discounts far too frequently. So we have to kind of recognize that this is going on, and how good buyers really make us perceive something that is not true. All right, so when I think about this, I am a very strong proponent of saying that sales folks that go through a full day training that is predominantly around price execution, maybe works in a little price setting, because every time in B2B when we negotiate a little bit, we're doing it with price setting principles, or should be. But the price execution are all the kinds of things I've just talked about a moment ago, and they are far different than sales negotiation training. Lots of companies think they do negotiation training, they can check this off the box and they're good to go. No. Negotiation training is wonderful. They need it as well. And it's going to certainly help them get in the door, try and get more growth, and even fight price pressure to some degree. But when it comes down to the hard decisions of dealing with aggressive competitors, of literally trying to influence the entire marketplace, of when you might have to give discounts, how much should you discount? And when should you? It just doesn't go into those critical dynamics. So again, I think that that kind of training can have immediate impact on your sales behavior. They can change the next day. And I hear that from salespeople all the time on how valuable that is and how they can immediately act. Now, if you're in a price increase, what I would suggest you also think about doing, beyond just training, but think about, get your sales folks together, either all or in little groups, and really say, what are the customers that are going to give us the toughest pushback? And what are the pushback arguments they're likely to give us? And then as a group, do some level of role play or collectively come up with what your best arguments or discussion points would be to push back to stop that price pressure from the buyer. And this can be very, very impactful for your salespeople before they go into the customer, so they're really ready to react to what's coming at them. Now, in the B2B world, let's face it, at times we will have to give something away. We hope it's surely not 50 to 70 to 80% of our customers, but there will be a few that actually make sense. And it is so critical when we do this that if we lower that price, we don't give them the discount, or excuse me, the increase, we need to do something like take something away so they know if they're paying less, they get less. And it could be longer lead times. We could exclude freight perhaps, or go to shorter payment terms. Do something there. Or we better get something of value. And what I see most salespeople do is they go for volume. And going for volume can be a great thing. What I so often hear is, hey, I didn't give them the 5% price increase, but no problem because I got 5% more volume. And they think they're whole. Boy, not the case. If you looked at the average Fortune 1000 companies, they actually need to get 4 times as much volume as the price increase that they gave away. So if they didn't get the 5%, they had better get 20% volume just to break even. So again, that comes into your skill and how they understand what that should be. Something else you might do in certain industries, maybe a temporary or select incentive, where maybe you give them a 30-day delay or X amount of tons that they can have at the lower price before it kicks in. But we definitely don't want to teach that buyer that they can push us, we give the discount, and it works for them. Because next time they're just going to push harder and harder. They have got to give something or we take something away, so they know we are valued pricers. Now, this last area is leadership. And of all these 3 areas, which are very important, I would contend that leadership is the most important. In fact, that strong leadership can cover up for a lot of weak skills and or not the best pricing. When our leaders stand up and really tell our salespeople that they have high expectations, that they have high unwavering expectations, if you will, on how much price increase to get. When they instill the courage and the conviction, and they do it in a way that's consistent, walking the talk. So the salespeople actually believe what they're saying. No good for the leader to say, hey, we have to get this increase. I know you can. And the next day, every time you see them, they're asking about volume. Right? They have to consistently talk about price as often as volume. And for sure, they have to be willing to risk some volume. If they send you out as a sales force and say, do your best, but whatever you do, don't lose a single account, whether that's overt or inadvertently, you're not going to be successful. They really must be willing to risk volume. And then let's celebrate the wins that we get. I'm losing my voice here. Let me just take a sip of water. I can tell you that if your leaders are not actively in front, proactively making a leadership stand that this is important, they are undermining your success. Their silence would be undermining you, because most sales folks are going to presume they might want the price increase, but volume still rules. So they're not going to take the chance unless it is very overt, said by the leaders, that risking some level of volume is what they expect and are willing to do. And in fact, guys, in hundreds of price increases where I have worked with businesses, the most successful is when that sales leader has stood up this way, has explicitly talked about the fact that we might have to walk away from some accounts if they're unwilling to accept our fair price, that we've had the greatest success. And in fact, 99% of the time, not a single customer was lost. And I am talking about businesses that really felt that they would lose a very large part of the volume. But with the right techniques, with the right confidence, the right skills, they were able to do this. Again, 99% of the time, no customers lost at all. So as I talk about this confidence and conviction, I just want to make sure you understand that as you do it, there needs to be a disciplined process and resourcing of the price increase. Right? You've got to have somebody monitoring. Is it working? Is it not? Should we intervene? Do we know exactly what communications are happening and when they went out? Those sort of things have to be in play to really make this work. So I just want to remind you, this is just kind of a little teaser, if you will, for the full day course that I'll be doing with PPS in May, and again in Atlanta with them in August. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Taylor.
Great, thank you, Joanne. That was excellent. And we've had a few questions come in during the webinar, but there's still time to enter your question into the panel on your screen for Joanne. And while you're entering, a reminder to complete that 10-second survey while exiting today's webinar to receive a copy of Addressing B2B Sales Challenges and be entered into a raffle giving away 3 copies of Joanne's book, The Pricing and Profit Playbook. So now to give you a couple more minutes to enter your questions, a few words on Leverage Point. Leverage Point's value modeling tool, as shown here, provides pricing, marketing, and product professionals a cloud-based interface to quantify their differentiation value and produce a value proposition for sales team use. Here you'll see the summary of the value model that shows a graphical view of your model and all of its underlying data. This is a simple view for modeling what-if scenarios. When a value model is complete, it's just one click away from publishing a value proposition. Leverage Point sales users then show a master value proposition early in the sales cycle, created by and editable by pricing, marketing, and product management. Whether they're selling to a VP of sales, product management or marketing, or even the C-suite, how do you want your salespeople to communicate your dollarized differentiation value? A digital, smart, interactive value proposition is the compilation of the expertise from your value-driven marketers, product managers, pricing, and sales enablement professionals. Sales reps now have a cloud-based tool that easily communicates the ROI and value that your solution provides similar customers in their industry. It clearly shows this in graphical and summary form. Located beneath the graphs and summary, there are assumptions that can be quickly modified in the meeting to align with the buyer's data. Beneath the assumptions, the overall value being delivered is broken down into specific value drivers that can be drilled down further for those buyers that are interested. Marketing collateral is provided in the tabs all the way at the bottom, including industry case studies, videos, and white papers. Leverage Point's sales users are saying that presenting this value to the customer early, they're wasting less time with unqualified prospects, allowing their pre-sales resources to spend more time working on winning qualified opportunities. If you're interested in learning more about Leverage Point, please click the appropriate boxes in the exit survey and we'll be happy to set up a time to see if the tool's right for you. And now on to the good part. We've had some great questions come in so far, and to answer the standard question myself, yes, this webinar is recorded and the slides and recording will be emailed to you within 2 business days. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Peyton Marshall, Leverage Point's chairman and CEO, to moderate Q&A. Peyton.
Thanks very much, Taylor, and thank you so much, Joanne. It's always great to have you in our webinars. So at the very beginning of your presentation, you talked about low success rates in price increases, and I'm sure you come across a number of businesses with that problem. As you look at them, how do you diagnose the issues? What do you do about those? And what's reasonable to expect in terms of how successful they can actually be after the work?
Oh, great question, Peyton. You know, quite often I'm working with companies that have done price increase after price increase and virtually got no increase or very, very little that actually sticks. And it's very easily, in a short conversation, you can very quickly see some of the issues on why they're having such problems. And really, it's very easy with the right training, helping them with the right price and that communication to really turn that around. And so when I have worked with companies, again, hundreds of companies that generally thought they just couldn't do this, they have tried and tried, all of them see a big improvement. And usually it is at minimum of at least doubling what they can do with their price success. And quite often it's more in the tripling of improvement.
Great. So you mentioned price training for sales. I think a lot of us do negotiation training. What's different, and how do you embed price training, or how do you make it relate to negotiation training?
Yeah, and it's very additive to negotiating training. But if you think about negotiation training, it's very much about kind of building the relationship. It is a very deal by deal by deal kind of training. And clearly, the good news is good negotiation training is really trying to help you understand the needs of the customer so we can relate our product offering appropriately and price appropriately to their needs. So that's a very additive phase that has to take place. But what it doesn't do is really think about the overall impact of any given deal and how it impacts the total market and the things we need to do to not only move that customer in that particular negotiation, but every future negotiation, how we can create less aggressive competitors overall, customers overall, but certainly how do we deal with these aggressive competitors? And we don't see negotiation going into that. We don't see them understanding kind of the math that goes on behind price and volume trade-off decisions, and how can we simplify that in a way that a salesperson who may not be back-oriented can quickly and easily understand that trade-off for their portfolio of products to make really smart decisions. And how they know when to drop and how much to drop, and techniques that will counter dropping. So they have to, if they give away the least amount. Those are things not done in negotiation training that are just so utterly critical. And Peyton, I'll tell you, I have heard on more than one occasion experienced sales managers with 25 years in the business say something like, "This is the best training I've had in my career," right? Because it's a different take on how to handle this aspect of the negotiation. And to a person, they are just learning and relating when you can put these in very, very practical terms for them.
You know, that's really a great point. You know, how it gets to the crux of the matter. I remember I got trained in negotiation 25 years ago by a guy named Herb Cohen, and all I remember from that was his almost his tagline: "You gotta care, but not too much." I'm not sure I pulled a lot of substance from that one. So next question, a little more analytical, analytical about price setting. After you do economic value estimation or analysis, how do you determine what the fair price is that you mentioned in the presentation?
Right. So we certainly have our value component piece, and things like leverage points certainly help us get at that kind of thing. But then when we look at the other rationale, it can be things from, geez, my raw materials just went up 5%, and I can easily calculate how much of that I would need to push on in my price to be held whole and healthy. It can be by looking back historically over the last 10 years or something that has looked at our supply demand and when it is tight and when it is loose, and what has been the pricing through those valleys and troughs so that I know that as I get tighter, I should have a certain amount of price uplift potential. And certainly that can get very, very deep as we go into advanced pricing, where we look at the marginal producer and their pricing and how we can then predict what our pricing should be, could be going further. Okay, we're going to look at lots of external kinds of data when we think about that marketplace. We're going to look at growth rates. We're going to look at the GDP, producer price index, raw material indices. So a lot of analysis goes into how we can think about how much we can perhaps move the industry in a given market dynamic time.
Great. Let's turn to leadership and motivation. Here's a question. Our culture and leadership seem so volume focused. How can we get them more profit oriented?
Yes, this is probably one of the toughest challenges and one of the most important to overcome. And so certainly, if you're doing an all-day training with your sales force, you should have all your sales leader right into the VP there, because then the light bulbs are going to go off. They're going to see kind of the math side on why they're causing a profit loss, and they're going to begin to get so many stories that they can relate to in similar industries that were perhaps much more competitive, and yet were able to successfully turn it around. So I think the training piece can be, exceptional. The idea of getting your president or your CEO to sit through an all-day course is a whole lot less. So how you get them on board could be really sitting down with them one-on-one, or bringing in an external person like myself or someone else with their leadership team for an hour, and somewhere where they can be not just taught a little bit of the high level and their particular role, but to bring out case studies and things that help them truly understand that it is very doable, even in highly competitive situations.
Okay, so let's turn to a really specific problem, a product launch problem. And I'm sure you've seen these where going into a product launch, a price was set too low relative to value. How do you recognize the problem, and is there anything you can do to correct it?
Okay. Yeah, I actually have a story I just love in this particular area that I'll bring up. This particular product, the business actually started out doing great quantification of their value. So they were very pleased that they understood that their value was more than double what the next best alternative was. But then they fell down. What they did is they decided that their customer base just would not even be able to think about a doubling in price. That would be just too far out of the realm. So they went with a 20% price increase, which they were enormously pleased with. 20% was the highest they had ever seen themselves get in any product in any region of the world. So they felt that was kind of their limit that a customer would accept because it's been done in the past. Now, the interesting thing that happened is very quickly they began to pick up share. And what did their competitors do? Their competitors, in order to avoid losing all their share, dropped their price 35% over the next year. So at the end of the day, the market adjusted for that value, and it turned out to be a 55% value gap, which is pretty much splitting half of, what they thought their total value add was. But in this case, instead of getting their price 55% above what the market price had been, their poor action drove the entire market down 35%. So where they were very happy, they were now 55% higher than competition. I had to point out how much higher the entire industry and themselves would have been had they properly put out their price to begin with. So that's an extreme case where the differentiation was so strong that it could drive the entire market price in a negative way because they did not actually value price. And that is much harder, to get out of, because they've already created such a huge gap here. They have the proper gap. But I will also say, when you're the value leader in an industry, you are well positioned, in fact, usually best positioned to begin to move the whole market up if you're of reasonable size. So in those cases, if you follow much of what I've said, you get out there with your market message and your reasons on why the market can move and should move back up in the ways that it has been, you can begin to shift that, and players that are not the value player will begin often to follow you on that way back up.
Interesting, thanks. Here's an important one. How do we start? Are there one or two things that we should focus on that will help sales communicate price increases better?
Okay, so of course I say, hey, show up at the Professional Pricing Society conference and attend my workshop. Be a great one step. But beyond that, clearly, if you're in the pricing group, if you can help pull the communication material together, maybe with your market communication team or your leadership team, for the sales folks. The sales folks generally are not the ones that are creating at least the base of the communications. Somebody should be doing that for them with a bigger, more holistic strategy. They may be tweaking it and driving it down, maybe perhaps even using leverage point to get it to their specific customers. But the base should be coming from your marketing or your pricing group, so that they are well positioned. And then your leadership often is involved in that communications, particularly if we go third party or we're being interviewed by stakeholders and whatnot. That begins to get into your leadership, and all helps your internal sales team get that much more confident. Surely training them, giving them the rationale, helping them go into role play and things like that are going to help them be more successful when they go to increase price.
Great. Well, we advertised 45 minutes, so we're almost there, and there's really time just for one other set of questions, very logistical. So first, Joanne, can you confirm when and where the one-day course is? And secondly, is there another one-day course scheduled after the May session?
Sure. So in Miami, the Professional Pricing Society conference is there. I'm teaching on May 3rd. At that date, they are also asked me to do another session in Atlanta. This course, by the way, is one of the highest attended and just greatest reviews, because it's just so practical. So somewhere between the 1st and the 3rd will be another one likely offered in Atlanta. And of course, I sometimes do this within a company. They'll ask me to come and do their whole sales team, if you will.
Well, that's great. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. There's some other questions left, and I'm sure Joanne will be following up with you directly on those. But with that, I'll turn it back over to Taylor. Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peyton. Thanks, Joanne. And just a quick reminder that our next webinar, our May webinar, is Develop Value Propositions to Maximize Sales Impact. And that's Peyton Marshall presenting that one on May 11th at 11 a.m. And if you'd like to register, just check the appropriate box in the exit survey. And that's it from us for today. So thank you for taking the time to join us. And a special thank you to Joanne and Peyton for your insights. And from all of us here at Leverage Point, we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care.